Lights. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in tonight. My name is Deb Mullen. I'm the manager of the Willoughby Public Library, and we are coming to you live from Lake County, which is apropos.
It is.
Tonight, we're going to talk to Jennifer Boresz Engelking about her new book, The Hidden History of Lake County. As a reminder to everyone, you can keep up with the Between the Lines events by checking the library's Facebook page or library events calendar at we247.org. We've got a lot of great events coming up, including Lynn Cahoon, John McWhorter, and more. And for you local history buffs, we have another great program on local history about the Cleveland Indians with Luke Eplin, apologies there, author of Our Team. Tonight, I'm extremely excited to welcome Jennifer Boresz Engelking to Between the Lines. Jen is a writer. Oh, thank you for coming. Jen is a writer and producer based out of Cleveland. Hidden History of Lake County is her first book, and it was just published on April 19th. Jen has been published in numerous regional magazines and newspapers, including the News Herald, Lake Erie Living, and Northern Ohio Live. He has worked as a broadcast reporter for several years at CBS affiliates in Erie, PA, and Toledo. Jen has co-produced and written several documentaries that have appeared on Northeast Ohio PBS stations, including On the Ball, the story of Webb Seaball and the Railroad Watch, the Emmy-nominated Original North Pole, and The Battle for Women's Right to Vote, which aired on a Western Reserve PBS in 2017. Jen has also written scripts for several other documentaries, including an hour-long biographical piece about South Bend, Indiana business mogul and philanthropist Merlin Hansen, entitled Still Just a Toolmaker. And she has also appeared in 2 movies as reporter number 3 in the Tony Scott film Unstoppable, and as museum gala guest extra in the Josh Whedon directed film, The Avengers.
Well, thank you.
We have a lot of folks participating tonight over Facebook and Zoom. So if you have questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat or in the comment section on Facebook. Jen's going to start with a PowerPoint presentation. And so I hope that you all will participate by asking tons of questions. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
Thank you so much, Debbie. First of all, we were talking a little bit before, and I was mentioning that this series, I'm a huge fan, that I always try to watch it, and I love hearing authors talk about their books and the process for writing it. So I'm very excited to be a part of the series. So thank you to you and Willoughby-Eastlake Library for hosting tonight. And I'm going to share my screen here. Here we go. All right, can you see it? Good, okay. So as Debbie said, this is my book. It's Hidden History of Lake County, Ohio. It's published by the History Press and Arcadia Publishing, and it came out on April 19th. And it's very exciting. It's my first book, but I have wanted to write a book for a long, long time. I remember as a kid, I always liked reading and writing. And I mean, a lot of that was thanks to my parents. Hi, Mom and Dad, because they're watching, who always read to me and took me to the library. I have really amazing memories going to the library and just walking in and knowing I was going to leave with a huge stack of books and just the smell of the library. I think that book smell, no matter where you go, if it's a library or bookstore, it just takes me back to being a kid and to that feeling. And always loved the summer reading program. So it's fun now. I have 3 kids and I can take them and they get excited when it's May and they know the reading program is starting up. So thank you to the library and all of the librarians for all that you do. And I wanted to share with you, so this is, let's see, I can get it, there we go. Okay, this is what I would consider to be my very first published story. And I was in high school, it was 1995. And as you can see, it's the Lake County History News and Review. So even back then, I guess it's interesting that my first published piece was even in history and Lake County history back then. And I got to have this published because my Aunt Peggy, who's also watching, I believe, hello, she was the president of the Volunteer Association and a trustee for the Lake County Historical Society in the 80s and 90s. And I just have memories of my parents taking me to the Historical Society. And I remember the Little Mountain Folk Festival and my aunt, taking us on tours of the building. And of course, for a lot of people, you might remember Pioneer School. I'm not sure if they're still doing it. I hope they are, but the Historical Society did something called Pioneer School, where you would go as a field trip and you would go to the Historical Society and they would be dressed up in the period costumes like pioneers. And you would get to learn things like candle making. And I think we made Johnny cakes and candles and what it was like in a one-room schoolhouse. So this was my first story, thanks to my aunt who helped me get it published. So I had to put that up there, but let's see. So this is the full cover of my book. I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I chose the different pictures for the cover. The front cover is Willow Beach, and that would be in the early 1900s. And it was colorized by the very talented Jim Dudash in Menor. And then the back cover is by AC Aerial Photography and is the Fairport Harbor West Breakwater Lighthouse. And I think really the lighthouse is, it's a Lake County icon. So I just love the color and felt it was a perfect fit for the back cover. And so as I was researching the story, I think one of the biggest things I came across was just how much history there is in Lake County. I knew there was history, but when you start researching it and one thing leads to another story, I was just really amazed. And I feel like I could just keep researching and keep finding new stories. And that's one of the things that's been really nice about my experience in the past few weeks of having my book published is I'm hearing from people who enjoy it, and it's reminding them of, stories from their families, and they're sharing it with me, which is amazing to hear. There's a woman in Menor who is 7th generation in a home in Menor. Her children are 7th generation. So I love hearing from readers about their connections to Lake County. And I had so many stories that I was at my maximum length for my book. So I had to cut a few stories, but I'm saving them for my next book. So you'll still hear them or read them. Okay, so let's get into my book. This is a map of Geauga and Lake counties in 1857. You can see Lake County is, you see the pink outlining it in the upper part of the map. And there are 88 counties in Ohio. Lake County is the smallest county. It is 228.2 square miles. And we are next to the largest county, which is Ashtabula. So this, I think, is very interesting. It's the size of Lake County almost prevented it from becoming a county. Pioneers in Painesville, that was part of Geauga County, got tired of traveling to the county seat that was in northern Geauga. So they decided to create Lake County using part of Geauga and Cuyahoga counties. But the area they proposed didn't meet the minimum size requirements to become a county. So they met with a lot of opposition. But luckily, they discovered the original surveyor maps. And in the surveyor maps, they realized that part of the land was actually under Lake Erie. So on March 6, 1840, Lake County was created, and 2/3 of it is actually lying under Lake Erie, which I thought was very interesting. Did not know that before. All right, and so I'm from the western end of Lake County. So this is a familiar spot that I drive by often, but it looked much different in 1905. This is Lakeshore, Boulevard, and Vine Street. And I believe that you're looking at it going west on Lakeshore. So I think you would have Speedway on the corner, North Shore Mall, and then behind you would be McDonald's. So I just think it's so interesting to see these comparisons of more than 100 years ago. I mean, there you could see houses, farmland, a dirt road, just how much it's changed and comparing it to what it looks like today. And in fact, it was said that the road was so narrow and so bumpy that 2 cars couldn't pass back at that time when it was a dirt road. So if you head down, if you keep going west down Lakeshore, you will run into Lakefront Lodge. So these are obviously modern photos of Lakefront Lodge in Willowick. And it's a place that growing up in the area, I've always liked going there. I, enjoy seeing the lake and watching sunsets. You get amazing sunsets there. And then in the summer, you can listen to the music. But 171 years ago, in 1850, it was the site of a major disaster. And you can see on the right, there's a historical marker that's been there for a number of years. And it does explain a lot about what happened in 1850. But from what I've discovered in researching, there was so much more to the story. And I think still, a lot of people, not just people from Willowick, go to Lakefront Lodge. And I don't think a lot of people really understand or know the depth of what happened there. So this was one of the stories as a kid, growing up in Willowick. I heard there was a shipwreck. And as a kid, I didn't hear all the details of the shipwreck, but I knew there was a shipwreck that happened close to where I grew up. And I heard that there was possibly, treasure and gold and silver and things that your imagination wanders, and maybe I could find treasure on the beach. So that kind of always stuck with me, especially as someone interested in storytelling. And then I heard that there was an amusement park that was built along the same area. So we will get to that in a little bit, but that's Willow Beach. And it just struck me that you have something that's so tragic as a shipwreck. Hundreds of people died from this shipwreck, and it's in the top 3 of the worst on the Great Lakes. And then you have an amusement park in the same place. So I always just felt like I wanted people to know, to remember all the lives that were lost there and have a better understanding of what happened. Let's see if I can switch to the next. There we go. So this is the G.P. Griffith. It's a drawing that someone made, but it was a steamboat. And I'm going to read a little section from my book about the Griffith. On warm summer evenings at Lakefront Lodge, Willowick residents enjoy sweeping views of Lake Erie as the sun sinks below the horizon, leaving behind brushstrokes of pink, orange, and deep purple across the sky. It's hard to imagine such an idyllic setting was once the site of one of the greatest tragedies on the Great Lakes. On June 16, 1850, the 3-year-old steamboat G.P. Griffith departed Buffalo, New York on a 3-day trip to Toledo. The 600-ton, 192-foot sidewheeler was named after businessman Griffith P. Griffith and constructed in Maumee in 1847. Charles Roby, who bought an interest in the ship, was celebrating his inaugural journey aboard the Griffith with his wife, children, and several relatives. It carried 326 passengers, 256 in steerage, 43 in the cabin, and a crew of 25, including many European immigrants headed west. In the pre-dawn hours of June 17, 1850, while hundreds of people slept on the ship, nothing unusual was noted during stops in Erie, Pennsylvania and Fairport, its last stop before Cleveland, where it picked up more than a dozen additional passengers. Around 4 a.m., several people in Willoughby, present-day Willowick, saw a strange light on Lake Erie. It was the glow of a fire that would quickly engulf the G.P. Griffith. So one of the things I noticed with the story of the Griffith, because it happened so long ago, and there's a lot of different tellings of the story and different records, that the numbers of the people who were on the ship tended to vary a bit. But after reading a lot of newspaper articles from the time, the numbers that I included in my story seems to be the most consistent of what I could find. And after cross-checking many records. And then also the records were destroyed in the fire on the ship. So you really can't trace it back. So in the early morning hours, David R. Stebbins, he was the ship's first engineer, builder, and designer, was attending to the engine. He had recently oiled the engine and reinforced the ship with what he believed to be the latest in fire prevention technology. Later studies found that what he thought was fire-resistant oil was in fact very flammable and explosive. So Stebbins said, when the fire began, they had lifeboats that were prepared to launch, but they weren't put down while the ship was moving because their thought at the time was that they feared that they would be swamped. By the time the ship slowed, the fire had spread and the boats just couldn't be reached. So only 37 passengers survived, and most of the passengers owed their lives to Stebbins. So passengers said he stayed on the Griffith until very last minute. It hit a sandbar that some say, if the wind is right and the waves you can still see from Lakefront Lodge out on Lake Erie today, he jumped in and he swam to shore. And when he got to shore, he found a small boat, took it back out to the fire, to this burning ship, and he brought back as many people as he could. And he went back and forth several times and obviously saved several dozen passengers. So I think Stebbins' story is so interesting because here you have, he built and designed this ship. He thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was fireproofing it, clearly wasn't fireproofing it. But he ended up saving the most lives. So it is believed that 286 passengers died. And the thought is mainly that they couldn't swim. At the time, people weren't taking swimming lessons and learning to swim like we do today. So that's likely one of the reasons. Another reason is that people were jumping in and there were so many people all jumping in at the same time, and they were just trying to grab for whatever they could. So they were bringing other people down with them. And then, you know, some of the theories were that people were weighed down by their own valuables, that these were mainly immigrants and they were traveling with things that were heavy. They may have had coins or things that were valuable that they sewed into their clothes. So if they jumped in, it's possible that that could have weighed them down. And also they had heavier clothing back then. So that could have weighed them down. But according to the research I did, it seems like only one deceased passenger was actually found with money sewn into her dress. So I'm not so sure about the theory of people sewing it into their clothes. So at the time, it was a June day and it was very hot, and there were hundreds of bodies, and locals were rushing down to the shore and they were trying to help and trying to save who they could, but they also had this really grim decision to make of, well, what do you do? So they tried to track down as many people as they could, try to find family when they could connect it to one of the victims, but many of them were immigrants and they didn't have local ties or they couldn't identify them. So they decided to dig several mass graves. And the thought was that it may have been on the sand, right on the shore. But then this is one of the areas where there's varying accounts. So some people say it was right on the sand. They just put them right there. But then if you know the area, you know that there's cliffs. And so other accounts are saying it's possible that they buried them up on a cliff. So this area is believed to be west of Lakefront Lodge, where the marker is today, and possibly in the area in what is now a residential area that would be spanning Larimar, Cresthaven, and Sylvan and Bruce. So I have other theories. There are a number of them on what actually caused the fire, because even though what Stebbins did wasn't fireproof, there's something that had to spark the fire. So I have more on those theories in my book, and also a few really interesting stories of survival from the Griffith. So this is another big inspiration for my book. Let me just take a sip of water. This is Willow Beach Amusement Park. And this would have been in the same area that the Griffith incident happened. Lakefront Lodge, I believe it may have extended to the east and then definitely to the west, curving around Cresthaven. And I have another section that I'm going to read from that part of my book. The property overlooking the lake across the street from today's Shoregate Shopping Center began with cottages, bathing areas, and dance pavilions, and was transformed into an amusement park by 1898. It was developed and owned by Cleveland, Painesville, and Eastern CP&E interurban railway owners Harry Everett and Edward Moore. So the interurban was an electric railway that allowed passengers to travel in between cities and small towns. And Edward and Moore collected both railway fares and park admission. So they were making a good deal of money off of Willow Beach Amusement Park and the interurban. So the stories of Everett, who built what is now Kirtland Country Club, and Moore, who built Moreland Mansion, are also in my book. But I love this photo. I think there's so much, it could just stare at it and find something new. There's so much happening in it. So if you look at the bottom left, well, kind of towards the middle, the bottom left, that is the interurban station. And you can see the tracks that are curved around. And then the building right behind that says House of Mirth. And from what I've discovered in researching a lot of amusement parks at that time, I think it was some kind of like a fun house setup. And then to the right, in the back, you see the big Willow Beach Pavilion. And you can see at the top of the roof, can you hear me?
No,
Okay.
we can't. Yeah.
Okay. Did you hear me describing the photo? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Debbie, did you hear the rest of it? You couldn't hear? I don't know. I didn't touch anything, but I guess it decided to mute me. Okay, so I'll go back. So in the photo, I was saying I really love this photo because there's so much, there, you really get a good view of what Willow Beach looked like. And you see the interurban, the train, and then the station in the bottom left. And then behind it is building. You can see on the front, it has some writing, it says House of Mirth. So I think based on my research of other amusement parks that were around at that time, that it was kind of like a fun house setup. And then to the right and in the back is the big Willow Beach Pavilion. You can see Willow Beach a little bit. You can see it written on the top of the roof. And then you really have to zoom in, which I know, unfortunately, you can't right now. But there's a photo, or there's the part of the photo that I think is really interesting is in the middle right, you can see, looks like two ladies, and there's someone who looks like he has a camera. So I think there's just, you get an idea, a little slice of life at that time. So by the early 1900s, Willow Beach was thriving with area churches and businesses holding annual picnics on the grounds. There were campgrounds and baseball fields and stands for Willow Beach baseball games. And I think that's such a great picture of the Willow Beach baseball team. And hydroplanes were known to land at Willow Beach, as you can see in the photo on the left, and in other photos from the early 1900s. And again, there's not sure, I think that's a different, yeah, that must be a different pavilion from the other photo, but there were a number of pavilions at Willow Beach. This is one of my favorite photos. This is the Perfection Spring Company outing at Willow Beach Park on August 11th, 1970, or not 1970, 1917. And of course, it was an amusement park. So there were a number of rides. There was a carousel. There was an auto roller coaster. So what you're seeing, that is not a roller coaster, it is an auto coaster, and it was called Jackrabbit. People would take their car, they would drive it up, and then they would just let it coast. So it would coast down the track into a ravine, which looking at it, it doesn't look very safe to me, but it was probably a lot of fun. But I would be interested, I can't find in research about there were any incidents with that or how long it actually lasted at Willow Beach, but I just think it's a really cool picture and interesting to think that, you know, right across from Shoregate in Willoughby, there was a big auto coaster. And I also like seeing everyone in their Sunday best clothing from that time. This is Willow Beach Park today. So it is actually, as you can see on the sign on the left, it is a private neighborhood beach club. It's on Cresthaven Drive in Willowick. And you can see in the middle picture and the picture on the right, this is what the beach or lack of beach looks like now. It's just rocky cliffs and there's clearly a lot of erosion there. But members and board members think that there is still an original piece of the park that remains. So look to the picture on the left next to the building, you see a triangle that's sticking out of the ground that's pretty far back. And if you compare Willow Beach, then this is actually my cover photo before it was colorized on the left. Willow Beach then, And Willow Beach now, you can see the pavilion looks awfully familiar with the roof. And so members of the beach club think that perhaps it was moved at one point because they knew that the erosion was getting worse and they didn't want to lose it, but they think that it's the original and the one that's in this photo. But the thing that's different is if you look at the 4 pillars, the pillars are square, and in the photo they're round. They look like they're just parts of a tree that they used. So they think that they likely, to modernize the look, that they probably took thin pieces of wood and put it around the original pillars. But if you look at the photo all the way to the right, you can see that the V-shaped support looks exactly like the ones in the photo. So I just think that's really interesting that obviously the auto coaster is not around, and the carousel and the rest of Willow Beach, but it seems to be that there's at least a piece of it that still exists here in Lake County. Historic downtown Willoughby. I love downtown Willoughby, and like the library in Willoughby, and they were a huge help going into the Willoughby Historical Society, which is housed in the library, and great shops and restaurants down there. So I think it's always fun to see old pictures of what downtown Willoughby used to look like. And in the bottom, you can see that even, I'm guessing this was back in the 30s or 40s, they decorated back then for Christmas, and it looked beautiful. This is downtown Willoughby in 1910. And you can see the carriages, the horses, you see the interurban going down the street. And then although the buildings are brick, you can see that there is many differences in the facade of the building, that the spires on the top are no longer there. I just think it's interesting to see what it used to look like. So in downtown Willoughby, you may recognize the Homestead House bed and breakfast, which the modern photo is on the right. The photo from many years ago is on the left, and it's a really beautiful building. It's owned by Deanna and Fred Rowe. And it's a building that has gone through many, many transformations over the years since the 1800s. Started out as a private home. It has been a brothel, a speakeasy, a charitable fraternity called the Independent Order of the Oddfellows, interesting name. It housed the first church service of the Willoughby Assembly of God. And later, many people remember this, it was the Willoughby Fine Arts. It was their first building before it moved to the present day location on Menor Avenue. So the Rowes have spent a lot of time renovating this building. When they got it, it wasn't in the best shape, but they could see that it had potential and wanted to turn it into a B&B. So while they were renovating, they came across some really interesting pieces of history. They discovered old bottles. They found a secret door, which there are more details about in my book. And they found an underground structure while they were digging in their basement and their backyard. So they realized in their basement, the ceiling height, it's a dirt basement, and that it wasn't up to code. So Fred dug out 15 inches of dirt by hand, and he took these buckets, dumped them outside, and now it's their lovely bedding for their flowers in the front and the back. But while he was digging, he discovered something in the basement that was very unusual. It was a large round structure, and it was made out of these beautiful old bricks that extended. The more he dug and cleared out the dirt, he realized it extended into the ground. So then while they were digging in their backyard, because they wanted to add a back door, because buildings didn't have back doors back then, he found a similar but a larger structure that had an angled slide that led to the circle in the basement. So they brought in an expert, a historical excavator, and he said, yeah, this is definitely an interesting discovery. We don't see this often. So he said the large circle of bricks in the backyard was a cistern, and it was used to collect rainwater and melting snow, and that went down the slide into the basement, into the smaller well. And this allowed the family to have fresh water all year, which at the time was basically unheard of. So I thought that was a really interesting discovery. And there are a lot of these stories in my book of these old historic buildings and people renovating them and just finding things in the walls, like the Unionville Tavern is just fascinating. They found a butter churner in one of the walls, and they think it was meant to be a time capsule. So they took a photo and they put it back in. So it'll be there again when someone can discover it one day. So because I'm very thankful for the libraries hosting this, and I love libraries, I wanted to put in the story that I have from my book about Mentor Public Library. This was the first subscription library in the Western Reserve, and it was the first library for the city of Mentor. And it might look familiar because now it is the confectionery cupboard, and they have wonderful cupcakes on Center Street. So the Mentor Library first opened in 1903 on Mentor Avenue, the corner of Mentor Avenue and Center Street. And Frances Estelle was the first librarian. So Frances was so dedicated to cultivating a love of reading. She delivered books by horse and wagon to schools in the township, which I think is just amazing. So even on cold days, Estelle would work in the unheated library building, and she actually by hand built bookshelves to add to the library as they got new books in. And then during the Great Depression, the library had to cut back on funding, but Estelle had an idea of how she could still help. So she worked for free for the first 3 months of each year, so the library could afford to buy new books with the money that they would have paid her. This always amazes me. And this is something, the more I researched this book, I didn't realize how many old buildings have been moved over the years. And I would have loved to have seen this being moved. But after many decades, the library was just too small. The population was growing in Mentor. So they shut down this original library and they opened a new one in 1960. And the old building was at risk of being demolished. But Mentor realtor Lila Moore Schaefer understood its historical value, and she had it moved to its present day location, which is at the corner of Nolan and Center Streets. And there are so many interesting stories of Lake County residents, like, Estelle and her dedication to the library, that I wanted to share a few. These are mainly on the western end of the county, since we're with the Willoughby-Eastlake Library right now. But we've got Earl Lane. He was a Tuskegee Airman from Wycliffe. He was awarded 8 medals during World War II, including the Distinguished Flying Cross. Harry Colby, he was named the Czar of the Great Lakes. He was the first mayor of Wycliffe, and he built Cole Allenby, which is Wycliffe City Hall. Anna Dowling, she was the teacher at District Number 7, that's the Little Red Schoolhouse now, and she also became principal of Roosevelt School. And Cook Cleland was from Willoughby. He was a flying ace during World War II, and he won the Thompson Trophy in the national air races. And their stories are just fascinating. So I had an idea because I love stumbling across little pieces of hidden history, things I didn't know about Lake County. So I made a little scavenger hunt, if you will, that you can try to track down. And you might know this, the first one's probably rather easy, but this is called the Willoughby Friendship Wall. And it is a wall that is made up of a lot of different rocks, including a piece from the Great Wall of China, a meteorite, a lava rock from Hawaii, and part of a millstone. And this was created more than a century ago when Willoughby Mayor W.J. Carmichael asked residents and friends to donate rocks to build a friendship wall in front of his house. And my kids like to climb on it. This is, I have to thank Alan Hitchcox for this one from the Willoughby Historical Society. This is a fancy outhouse in downtown Willoughby. And if you find it, please let me know where it is, because he told me it's behind a business. He may have told me which business, but I'm not sure. And I've been trying to find it when I go to various stores and restaurants in downtown Willoughby. So as you can see, this must have been someone who was quite well off, and they had stained glass windows in their outhouse. So please, if you find it, send me an email. This is a suspension bridge. You can see the remaining pillars on either side. It's blocked off, but it went over a gorge. So you might recognize this in one of our wonderful Lake County parks. This is in Kirtland. And these are all stories that are in my book also. This is a historic log cabin in Eastlake. And it has ties to Florida. And I will tell you, this one you can't see from the road. This is a bit further back, kind of behind something. This one is the last remaining covered bridge in Lake County, and this is also in Kirtland. And here we have Cook Cleland's Euclid Avenue Airport in the 1940s. So the name gives it away. It is on Euclid Avenue. You can see on the top of the hangar, it's kind of faint, but it says Euclid Avenue. I love this picture, seeing what that area that now has Lake West Hospital and all of the businesses and the restaurants, to think that it was an airport many years ago and how much it's filled in over the years. So now there is a business that is using the old hangar, but you can see it if you're driving down Euclid Avenue. It's not actually on Euclid Avenue, but you can see it from Euclid Avenue. So good luck. Maybe you already know where it is. But I hope you have fun looking for those and you enjoyed my presentation. And if you would like more information about my book, you can of course go to jenniferboresz.com and I'd be happy to answer questions.
All right, great. Well, we do have a couple of questions in the chat, Jennifer, so I'll start with that. Jane says there seems to be a huge distance between present day Willow Beach Park and Lakefront Park where the G.P. Griffith Memorial is posted. Was the entire strip of land between both parks once the entire Willow Beach amusement park?
Yes, from what I've been able to tell from my research and from looking at maps, it did stretch around that whole area. So across where Larimar is. And it was really, so you've got to remember, there were not only rides, there were dance halls, there was the baseball team, they had stands for the baseball team, and there was enough space that planes could land. So this was a pretty stretched out, not just what you think of as the present day Lakefront Lodge, but really stretched out around that area. I can't tell you the exact, it started here and ended here, but from the maps that I've looked at, it goes along that area. And even if you look at maps today, like if you look on a computer, it says Willow Beach in that area, which is interesting.
We have someone with a clue for the outhouse.
Oh, I want to know.
They may be right, because I think I may have heard this myself. They're suggesting that it's behind the Zealy attorney's office, across from the post office.
That sounds right. I think, yeah, I think that is what I remember. Alan mentioned it, and I guess I didn't write it down, and it's been a mystery to me since then. So I'm going to check it out. Thank you.
Awesome. And we have a former librarian in chat saying that that clue is correct. So
good.
Thanks,
you.
Bill.
You solved the mystery for me.
And we had another question, which I had this question for you too. How long did it take you to research and write this book?
It took about a year, I would say a little bit over a year. And then I sent it in, and then it kind of sat for a little while. I sent it in, it was right as everything was really getting started with the pandemic. It was March of 2020. So a lot of places were closing down, as we all know. So I'm thankful that it's published, but it was about a year of writing and about a year of waiting. And then about 6 months before of writing the proposal for it.
Wow. And so like your hours of research, how many hours of research would you estimate that you spent?
Oh gosh. I did do a lot of research before I started writing, like really just reading books and going to libraries and looking at old articles. So it was hours and hours, but I really couldn't even guess how many. But what I ended up finding was the places that are still around today, I tried to go to the source and really say, what can you tell me? Do you have old photos? Do you know of stories? Like confectionery cupboard, for example. The half of the story about what the building was before it was confectionery cupboard, I got through research, but then there's part in the book that explains things that they discovered after moving in. So it's just kind of a combination of talking to people who are currently in these places, and then melding it with the research from books and from the internet and old articles.
So was it difficult to determine, at least initially, which stories you were hearing were just folklore, and which you would be able to find more evidence to back up?
Yeah, and that's why for some of them I put them in under that section that's like legends and folklore, because they're stories that many of us have grown up hearing about, and I found a little bit more detail about maybe where they came from, or the rest of the story. But yeah, they're for the most part, I tried to find definitive information before I put it in. And then if I really, if I couldn't say like I cross-checked it enough, then I would say it's possible that this happened. But yeah, it's interesting because of our location. There's so much history, and there with Prohibition and the rum running across the lake and the Underground Railroad, and just there's so many stories of tunnels and like secret hiding places and buildings and things like that that are being found that I think are really interesting.
Were there any particular research sources that you found to be more reliable than others? Your bibliography is extensive though, so anybody who gets your book will see that.
Thank you. I think not necessarily, I wouldn't say that there was necessarily, like, of course I wouldn't rely on Wikipedia. I wouldn't, because that's something that can be changed. So I wouldn't just quote Wikipedia in it. But I would say that the biggest thing for me was making sure that I saw it multiple times, because some things I would see it printed several times, but then I would find like the true source for it, like the article from the newspaper when it happened. And I realized, well, and a few of them, and I realized, well, just because it's been printed several times doesn't mean that it really adds up to what was being printed at the time of the incident. So I really just tried to go as far back as I could to the original source if it was available, and then check it multiple times. So no, I wouldn't say that there was anything that wasn't really effective, except just trying to find it in as many places as I could to make sure that it was accurate.
So we have a question from the audience. Do you think the 2/3 of Lake Erie or Lake County that's underwater may be part of the Morton salt mine?
It could be. Yeah, I do talk about, because I think that's fascinating too, but that's also in my book, just about Morton and, the caves and getting down there. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I didn't go into it in this presentation, but it is in my book about the original surveyors and when they came into the area and just how they mapped everything out. So I think part of it was done before, they got here. They actually physically mapped it out. But the part with Lake Erie, they just, well, you know how the lake dips, and they just cut it across. They made it a square. So yeah, I don't know. That would be interesting to know the exact dimensions of where it exists. But I would think that would be part of it.
Another question from the audience. You may want to, well, I don't want to give away whether any of this was covered in your book, but if it's not,
okay.
They're wanting to know downtown Willoughby, in a basement speakeasy, they believe someone from the mafia was murdered there.
Ooh, no.
And she heard about it on one of the Haunted Willoughby tours.
Kathy, that's great.
Yeah.
No, I don't have that in my book, but I know from talking to the owners of a lot of the businesses in downtown Willoughby, and I can't say for that story specifically, that might be something that could be traced back as something that happened, but a lot of it is like stories that are passed down through the years that, like I heard, and I mentioned this in my book, that there were tunnels that connected the buildings. So side by side in downtown Willoughby on either side. And I asked some of the business owners, do you see any remnants of it? Do you see like something that looks like it was blocked in with bricks and maybe would have been an opening? And no one really could say that they saw something, but then I've also heard that there were tunnels going under the road. So for people, there's some who say it was just for the structure of it being created as a area with stores that they were able to transport things. And then some people say, well, no, it was for prohibition, to get away quickly or to bring things in illegally. So it's interesting when you get into tunnels and stories and basements and things like that. Yeah, I've heard lots of different interesting stories, but unfortunately, you can't always trace them back. Some of the ones that I was hearing about.
Is there anything from this book that you wish you could have dove more deeply into? And maybe you're planning a second book already, so maybe as another book.
Yeah, so I have saved some of the stories. First, let me back up. So Arcadia Publishing and the History Press, if you don't know, they're a national publisher, but they publish books that are about local areas, local cities or counties. So they have different series within the publisher. So my book that I just published is called Hidden History. So it's their Hidden History series. And it's about places, generally speaking, that are still around, or there's a piece of it that's still around. And then my next book is Lost Lake County. And it's mainly about places that don't exist anymore. But there is some crossover. So Willow Beach, could it go in either? Yes, because there's a piece that we believe exists still, but it's mainly gone. So there are a number of stories that I saved for Lost. And even if I mention part of it in Hidden History, for example, the Griffith, there was a lot more to it as far as where the graves may have been and some connections to other parts of the county. And I'm saving that for Lost. There's just, yeah, I know there are people who say, well, did you include this? Did you include that? And like, I know I'm from here and I know there's so many interesting stories that I would have loved to have put every single one. If it's not in this one, there's a good chance it could be saved for my next one.
Awesome. We have someone looking for a clue as to where the covered bridge is in Kirtland. Can you give us any clues?
Yes. Okay, let me think. Well, I think it's in a residential area. So I think that they are still public access streets, but I don't know for sure. But it's in a, how can I give a better clue? I don't know, I'm suddenly not good at clues with this. But yeah, it's in an area, it's not in a park, it's not in a main area of Kirtland, it's in a residential part of Kirtland.
All right. Someone asks, did your research include the Mounds Club, which today is Lavera Party Center on Chardon Road in Willoughby Hills?
No, and I do know about that history, and it's one of the stories that, you asked about diving into another one. I would like to research that more. It's not in this book, but I do think it's got a really fascinating history. So maybe in another one.
And we have another question, wondering what parts of Lake County does your book cover? Does it cover, both ends of the county?
It does. Yeah, it covers. I tried to cover the county as evenly as possible, from the west end to the east end and everything in between.
There's a question as to where folks can buy your book.
So more and more local stores are starting to buy them. So what I've been doing is putting a list as they get them in stock on my website. So if you go to jenniferboresz.com, and I guess I can stop sharing this now. There we go. It has information about where you can buy my book, and also Barnes & Noble in Menor had them. I know they sold out of their first couple of rounds, and they have a wait list, and they're hoping to get them in any day now. So they might have them in by now. And of course, on different sites, Arcadia Publishing, their website, Bookshop helps a lot of local bookstores. You can buy through there, Fireside Bookshop, Max Backs, but they're all listed on my website.
Awesome. Let's see. There's a question about Cody Park Apartments and their connection to Wild Bill Cody. Did you come across anything about that?
I did, yeah. In Willowick, I came across some conflicting information about that. Depending on where I looked, some said that it was Wild Bill Cody, and some said it was a sibling of his. So that's another story I would like to try to get into a little bit more and get to the bottom of. But yeah, more interesting Willowick history.
And question about where you're going to have any book signings in August.
In August, what do I have set up in August? I'm trying to think. I have a big one towards the end of July at Devonay. I have them listed on my Facebook page, but I'll put them up on my website too, because I do have several in August. I have more like coming up in the next few months, because those are the ones I scheduled most recently. But yeah, I'll put a list on jenniferboresz.com, and you can see all of my book signings that I have scheduled.
So of the various career opportunities you've had between being on television and a little bit in the movies and now writing a book, have you picked a favorite of what you enjoy doing?
Yeah, I like pieces of all of them, but for me, it just all comes down to stories and telling stories, and it goes back to, you know, being a kid and making them up. Like, and my mom would tell me stories as a kid, and I remember just being really young and trying to write my own books. So I feel like all the things in between I've enjoyed doing. I liked reporting. I liked doing the human interest stories when I was reporting. It was really fun being in a movie. Something I always thought would be really cool to do and didn't know that it would happen. So that was fun. But for me, the heart of all of it is just, in whatever way it happens, to be able to get to the heart of a story and researching it. And so this has been really special for me, because not only did I get to write a book like I've always wanted to, but it's a book about the area that I care about. And so it's partly for me to learn about the stories, but it's really fun to be able to share it with everybody else and my family and Lake County residents. So yeah, they would say if I had to pick a favorite, this I think really goes back to the heart of what I've always wanted to do, even when I was a kid.
Cool. Were there any books that you used in your research that you had a special liking for that you could recommend to our listeners, viewers?
Special books. You know which book was just really interesting? And I know I've heard other people say they've read this, but the story of Robert Mannery. He wrote Tinkerbell, which was his account of taking this small sailboat across the ocean. And I mean, it reads really kind of like a diary. Like, it's just like a step-by-step of what he went through from the very beginning and getting this boat and getting it ready to go across the ocean, all of the provisions and things that he somehow fit into this boat, about being thrown out into the water a number of times, and then his arrival in England and just these crowds gathering around him. And he said he felt like he was a rock star, like, you know, as the Beatles. Of course, it was in the 60s. That was a really fun book to read. And I mean, there were a number of other ones, but that's the one that really stands out.
And let's see, do we have any other questions out there? All right, well, I loved your book. I thought it was awesome. There were so many things that brought back this nostalgia to me, because like I lived across the street from the Little Red Schoolhouse, and
Oh, neat.
I actually lived right next door to Mannery Park till I was 7. So
Wow.
it was just really cool to, you know, see things that I knew growing up, you know, in a book. So.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And that's so fun for me to hear when people read it and they, you know, learn something new or just enjoyed reading it.
It was awesome. Well, and we just have a lot of compliments on your presentation. And again, we just appreciate you being with us this evening.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you so much. All right, well, have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.